Welcome to Classical Etc., a show that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Shane Saxon.
All right, so on today's episode, we're going to talk about curriculum. Memoria Press is a curriculum provider. It's kind of at the heart of everything we do, all the various institutions that we're a part of and that we're working to serve. So, Martin, first, definitionally, what is a curriculum?
A course of study. A curriculum is a collection of educational material that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, that has a goal that all the parts are aimed at, and that works together in some way so that it's comprehensive and deep and fulfilling and all that. And it's, we have a curriculum in Memoria Press. Formally now, we had a lot of resources that when we started out, we had a lot of books on different subjects, but the goal was always to complete some sort of whole curriculum. And so, you see that in our curriculum packages now, where you can look at it and you can see that it's a whole thing.
Tanya, what about you? Define a curriculum for us.
Oh, I wasn't ready with a 2-word thing to shorten his.
Sorry.
Actually, I think he did a very fine job. I totally agree with Martin about what a curriculum is. And that even though we didn't have a formal curriculum all those years ago, I taught the very first 5th grade here, aging myself. And Cheryl handed me that stack of books that then became our 5th grade curriculum. So it was chosen in her head. And we just hadn't developed it. And then we developed it through the school as the need arose. Remember when she came into our Latin classrooms at 5 till 8 every morning and handed us our Latin lesson for the day that she had finished writing at 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah,
I'd never taught Latin before. I'd sat in her Latin class for 2 years, never seen that vocabulary specifically, didn't know what the grammar form was going to be. And at 5 till 8, she handed it to me, and there sat my students waiting in 5 minutes for me to teach this Latin class.
Well, it says something about some of the materials in our curriculum because, it was something that you could teach. I had taught Latin before, but not necessarily the same vocabulary, not exactly,
Right.
And so you could, that was the nice thing about the Form, which is the Form series is what you're talking about, was the prototype.
That's right. That's right.
And it's so well constructed that you can hand it to somebody walking into the classroom and you can teach it and they will learn it. How many programs are out there that you can do that with? Right?
Yeah, it worked. But it really wasn't my ideal way to prepare for class.
Yeah, you're giving them vocabulary, which you get. There's a word or two in there that you've never seen before, but the students don't know that.
That's right.
But you learned it there on the spot, and so did everybody else.
So, Paul, when Martin says that curriculum is a course of study, is there something that distinguishes curriculum as we have defined it as something that we have K to 12, a beginning, middle, and end, and various materials that are used for different classes?
That's a phenomenal question. I was really hoping you were going to ask me the same question you asked them.
We answered it completely. So
Actually, I was going to say I wanted to disagree with you, but I couldn't. I did want to emphasize something, which actually gets right to your point, is that there is specific content in a curriculum. Because I called up a superintendent once trying to sell Memoria Press curriculum. Like, this would be really good for you. And he's like, no, thanks. We already have a curriculum. And I realized what he meant was something very different from what I meant by curriculum. What he meant was he had standards. He had standards that said by 3rd grade, the students are going to be able to, write a paragraph. That was his curriculum. But what we mean by that is that there's specific content in here. There's specific skills as well, but you're going to learn those skills by learning Roman history, right? And we do that by saying, not only are you going to learn Roman history this year, but you're going to learn Roman history through this book, right? Because this particular book, Famous Men of Rome, is going to teach you Roman history through biography. which we think is an important methodological principle in the way you're going to teach younger children history, right? And so I think that was your question, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Content. There has to be content in a curriculum. Otherwise, it's ethereal, and it's there's a difficulty in achieving it, because how do you know when you got a third grader writing at a third grade level? I mean, I've seen standards like that before, right? A third grader should write at a third grade level. Well, that's really helpful. But when you have a teacher's guide that shows like they should be able to write this paragraph, right? Or, or approximate that sort of thing, that gives flesh and blood to it.
What he was talking about sounds like what I would call a curriculum guideline.
Yeah. There was something else I was going to say, but
I completed his thought for me.
This set me off track.
Yeah, it's just such an old couple. It's great chemistry. So, Martin, one critique that I feel like I hear against people who have a curriculum focus is the experiential critique that, back in the day when I was in school, my history teacher was so boring and I don't remember anything that he said. What I do remember is that one teacher who gave me a passion for this topic. So content's really not that important. What I need is a teacher who is, really dynamic and who's really exciting, and content, it's going to change in every situation. Would you critique that critique?
Yeah, to me, that's a school that doesn't have a curriculum. That's almost a paradigm case of that, because curriculum is not a bunch of teachers that you have in your school, many of whom even the same grade are doing different things in the same subject. And that's not a curriculum. A curriculum, what a curriculum does for you is allows you to advance, okay? It means that the second grade has to end in a certain spot and the third grade has to begin in a certain spot so that you can continue on that path that is trying to get you to a certain point in the end. If you have people who are doing different things, that completely mucks up anything you might call a curriculum, because who knows, where's a third grade teacher know to start? What usually happens is we spin our wheels for years and years, and we're doing things that should have been done last year but weren't with half the class or whatever it is. And that's why I always say that most schools think they have a curriculum, but they don't. They really don't have a curriculum, because a curriculum works together. This gear is connecting with the next gear, and so on. Most schools just simply don't have that. And if you ask them for it, you get something like what Paul was saying he got from the one administrator. You get some guidelines or something. That's not a curriculum. That
content is it's so important, because, I had a friend teaching at a school and he got to choose, he was a literature teacher, he got to choose which books he was going to teach. And I thought, well, then the next year, how is that literature teacher going to have anything common to refer back to if they don't know that all of these students read these certain books, right? And having that content defined takes a huge load off of the teacher. Like, I just remember the stress he was under during professional development in the summer of like, I've got to choose what books I'm going to read. Well,
don't you have a curriculum department at your school? Isn't that what they should be doing, is telling you that? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, but the other part of your question was, what about the quality of the teacher? Well, that is irrelevant to the curriculum in many ways. I mean, okay, so you have a class that was boring. Well, was the curriculum boring, or was the person who presented it boring? And if it's the person who presented it boring, then replace the person. But you need to have that, not the material. I mean, a good teacher is going to be able to make any material, exciting for a child. But here's what happens. I was in a school, and I went into the advanced Latin course. And the teacher was doing basically her own. She was a professor at a nearby college, knew Latin. I think she taught Latin at the college. And she was there, and they were doing the conversational Latin and all this stuff. And the principal asked me what I thought of the teacher. And I said, how long are you going to have her? Because when she's gone, all that stuff she's doing goes bye-bye.
Right.
And whereas if you've got a curriculum and you have material in there that is the same every year, it's a part of the curriculum, it works into the whole thing, then when that teacher's gone, the next teacher can do the same thing, maybe not as well as that teacher did, but she'll be able to do the same thing and you'll have consistency from year to year. But the problem with a really good teacher in a lot of cases is they're not replaceable.
Right.
You can't just clone that person. And so Jacques Barzun, one of his 3 educational fallacies, is that you can base everything on what this one really great teacher did. You just bottle that and you give it to the next person. Can't do that. You can't bottle that. You got to have a curriculum that's there every year.
Speaks to why our curriculum has been so helpful for so many homeschooling parents. And it's because they're learning it right alongside of their children, and they remember what it was like the day before they mastered it to not know, and what they need to know. And with these expert teachers, they've forgotten a long time ago what it was like to not know, and it creates this gap.
I think also like a curriculum in a homeschool context, right, lets the younger kids know when I get to be that age, I get to do X, Y, or Z, right? And so they're looking at what their older siblings are doing, and because there's a set path, right, of like, okay, when you're in 2nd grade, you get to start Latin, and okay, then they know when they hit 7 years old, they can say, "Hey, Mom, why don't I get to do that?" Right? There's an expectation that goes for the school as well, right? There's your sophomores know that when they hit this level, they're going to be doing X, Y, or Z, right? And so it sets expectations as well for students. They know what's coming their way.
It's like a rite of passage.
What we're talking about is it's consistency. A curriculum gives you consistency from year to year.
So Tanya, you were there at the beginning with Mrs. Lowe as she was developing this curriculum. I've always been curious. I know that it was in her head largely. How much of it was apparent to you at the beginning, and how much did you discover, here's the path as you guys built it?
It wasn't really apparent to me at the beginning, except for what she gave me to teach. But then as we went along, we were so small then too. We had 1 4th grade, 1 5th grade, 1 6th. But what she did is encouraged us to read all of the novels and the history books from the year before we taught and from the year that comes after we taught, so that we would have the context of what the students know and the context for where they're going and connections that we could make. And that was really important to her, was that we do make those connections and that we are guiding the students toward harder things by, I think I did this in a previous podcast, where, to lead them to the Lady of Shalott, we do King Arthur with Lancelot and Elaine, and then in the 5th grade or 6th grade. And then we do Anne of Green Gables, where she almost drowns, playing the Lady of Shalott. And then when we get to the actual poem, our students have the context for that. But we're also hopefully reminding them that of these other things. We do the same thing with the Trojan War, leading us to the Iliad. And so it is all connected in her head. But she started it knowing what she wanted our high school students to accomplish. And then she worked her way backwards to get there to that. Like, what do we need to do in grammar school to prepare our students for high school for these certain things? We want them to read Latin literature. We want them to read Shakespeare. We want them to read, you want them to do, I'm going to do one of those subjects. We want them to do advanced math. We want them to get to calculus. So what do we need to do in the grammar school to make that happen? And what do we need to do in the primary school to prepare our students for what they're going to do in the grammar school? So it was all just this beautiful plan in her head that, thank goodness, she did manage to impart to us and get most of it done. But it was, it changed a little, but not a lot. Every year she would bring me a sheet of paper that said, this is the high school final curriculum. Every year. And I would say, but you said it was the final curriculum last year. And then the year before, and I had this stack. I've started stapling them. And every time she would bring me a new one, I would pull my stack out and she would say, oh, now stop it. And I'd staple that one on. So it did change a little, but not a lot. It's still a lot of what it was 20 years ago.
Well, and I was just telling you the story of when I was, 4th grade and 4th, 5th grade. And, I'd go to her once or twice a week for classes, and she was making us memorize Horatius back then. Right. I mean,
Yes,
her expectations got higher as the years went on, because I only had to memorize 8 or 9 stanzas, but that was in the curriculum because it was an important part of this trajectory that she had.
Yes.
So Mrs. Lowe had this plan kind of in her head, and that's part of what made it the path that we have. Martin, a few minutes ago, you kind of sarcastically took a shot at curriculum departments. What's happening there? Why aren't these departments, why don't they have these kinds of visions in their head? What do you think is affecting their focus?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about public schools and some private schools, what happens is something like Common Core will come along, or whatever the newest thing that the state passes or whatever, and they'll come up with these standards. So they take everything they were doing and they throw it out, and they tell the teachers, we just need to do that like Common Core. And so they're given these documents that don't help anybody do anything. I knew a Spanish teacher who was kind of a friend of our kids, and she taught a Spanish course at the local school. And I said, well, what book are you using? She said, well, I'm not using a book. I have to do like Spanish Common Core, which she had to put together herself. So you have all these teachers being curriculum developers who have no experience, who don't know the rest of the curriculum, that's what I mean by saying schools don't have a curriculum. It's just it's a hodgepodge of random materials that teachers themselves at individual schools are putting together, which is different from the school down the road, which is, so if you transfer, you get into situations like you may read, they'd be lucky if they read a book like Charlotte's Web. They don't read much classic literature in schools because of copyright problems, and the books are too expensive for them. But even though they have more money than the private schools that do, and you might read at this school, you're in second grade and you read Charlotte's Web, and then you transfer to this other school for third grade, and they're reading Charlotte's Web there, so you read it twice, and you may even read it again in fourth grade because they're doing it at this school that you had to transfer to. It's so ridiculous. There is no coherent curriculum planning really going on at state levels or even at district levels.
And it's
you should
very
at least have a
faddish,
district.
too.
It's very fat. It changes all the time. As soon as you put the final piece in, even if you did build a curriculum of your own, here comes the next thing that's fashionable, and you got to throw that all out and start over again.
Well, and I mean, I've seen administrators also say, well, we've got this new set of standards that we have to meet. Let's just take what we're doing and show how that meets those things. And it's a game, right? It's no longer something that's actually driving anything. Right. It's we have to jump through these hoops.
Yeah, but there's no incentive in the system for consistency.
So one critique against curriculum on that consistency point could be that in various situations of the country, various schools, various kinds of people of various backgrounds don't need to have the same curriculum, perhaps. Someone could say, if you're from Wisconsin like I am, well, you got to learn about the tribes. They migrated to Wisconsin, and so in fourth grade you need Wisconsin state history. So every school needs to be hyper specific, and so a large vision of curriculum doesn't work. How would you respond to that? Well,
traditionally in this country, states did determine that sort of stuff. There was the Department of Education, the federal department, is a fairly recent thing. So, I have old books from like Kansas State, but they had coherent Kansas State, which all the schools in Kansas were supposed to do. And it was very specific, grade by grade. So that was a legitimate curriculum. That's fine. That's no problem. And you're doing a little bit, something in Kansas that's a little bit different from Minnesota or whatever. But they don't even do that anymore. It's not consistent in the state. It's not consistent, from district to district, from school to school within a district. There's no consistency at all in a lot of these places.
Let me interject here and say that in the context of the liberal arts, right, which we're trying to say, we are promoting an education that is universal. Right. We're speaking to the universality of truth, goodness, and beauty in the world, and then humanity, and yada yada yada. Right. And nice follow up for truth, beauty, and goodness. Yada yada yada. So there has to be. Right. I think if you go from Wisconsin and studying the tribes to come down here to Kentucky state history, there should be enough common between the two, right? We're all the same human beings, right? We largely share the same culture. Now, there's a lot of amazing, unique local things, right? And those things should be celebrated, those things should be taught, et cetera. But there's enough that's common to all of us that we should be able to.
Well, the
to
thing
go back
that
and
should
forth.
be common is we have this unit in state history in all states. You can do it differently in each state, but you've got that unit is the same from state to state. And, probably some general requirements of what you have to do. But I mean, that's very true. I mean, in California, when I grew up in the 60s and 70s, we studied the California missions. Now they're not doing that anymore, but and I think, and I'm an advocate for local and state history. I think it's important. But at least have, even at your state level, say this is your unit. You need to do a unit in middle school on state history or whatever that is. At least have that be consistent. You can actually fill that with some different things even. But all states and all schools should have some true common core, which is we call ours a classical core curriculum, because we're saying this is the best of the best. This is the thing that has held us together and over 100, 200 years. These are the things that are worth all students studying. And there's still room to do a few other things, but everybody should do these things. And, E.D. Hirsch is big on this, that we should all have common knowledge, common background knowledge. And the classical core curriculum really tries to do that for a classical curriculum. And the more schools that do it, the more, they'll have this certain body of knowledge in common so they can talk to each other.
That's well said. I think you're right that if the trivium is preparing students how to think, every student needs to be prepared how to think, and curriculum can do that and still leave some room for some particularities in each situation.
Sure.
So Paul, coming back to you, with the Memoria Press curriculum specifically, we kind of as an institution have focused on producing curriculum. Why did we make that decision rather than focusing maybe more specifically on something else in education?
Are you talking about like the difference between creating our resources that we have for students and teachers versus like theory books?
Yeah.
Or something like that? I think one way I've characterized Mrs. Lowe for years was she was an eminently practical person. She was somebody who had her feet on the ground, but she could, think and engage at the highest levels as well. Right. Which is I think in that sense, she was very unique. And she was like, it doesn't matter if I can conceptualize all these high ideals if I can't put it into practice. And she saw, the need for that just, very practical, how do we get this done, right? So we could have written guidelines saying, you need to be able to do these things in these grades, but that would not have empowered as many people to actually get those things done. And I've seen educational plans that are wonderfully ambitious and informed and sort of the books that are out there that you can do with regards to classical education. But for somebody who hasn't been classically educated, to get one of those plans and look at it and go, oh my gosh, this is a list of 150 books for this grade. What am I to do? Well, the plan is written in such a way that it's sort of like you can pick from any of these, right? But the teacher doesn't know that. They feel like they got to get it all done or whatever it is. And the teacher doesn't have the background to make those sort of decisions. And so it's sort of making that decision to say, okay, here's a consistent curriculum. Here's resources. We've poured, a decade and a half. No, I'm thinking it's 2015. I mean, we've 2.5 decades into, developing all of these things. Then, that's all that effort then can be poured into the teachers around.
And it started. I'm sorry.
You said this before. You're talking about, a teacher having to be, not just a teacher, but did the additional duties of
developing curriculum. Yeah.
This is really true. Teachers have enough to do without being their own curriculum developer. You are doing them a favor by giving them the material that needs to be taught. And they may want to teach something else, but if there's room in the curriculum for that, but they need to do the stuff that's in the curriculum, and the next teacher that comes to replace them when they leave can keep it consistent and do that same material. But you're really creating a problem for them if you make them have to do curriculum development as well. Let them teach.
I was just going to say, to Paul's point, Cheryl was very practical, but it started from a very practical purpose. Is she felt like her children weren't being educated, and so she wanted to find the best education for them. So she did read all of that high, elevated, philosophical stuff in order to figure out what she felt like a true education was. But then she was able to take it one step further and say, I don't want to what I've found is essential. And so her passion for it then led her to not just educating her children, but whoever could come into her house to take Latin and famous men of Rome. And then it just grew all by itself, just from word of mouth. And then, her idea that there is no Latin curriculum out here for young students, but this is when they memorize, and this is when they need to, if we're going to have them translating, then they need to learn the grammar forms young when they can do it. So she wrote Latina Christiana. So it all basically started in that room above her garage, and in her living room. At the beginning, she was just doing what she could do for whoever would come to her. But I don't think she ever envisioned that it would end up being a school of 750 students or people using it across the world. That was just, it was all, as Lee says all the time, it was providence that all of this has been able to come together like it has. But it did start very practically. How can I educate our children? And what is the best way to do? What is a real education? That's where it started.
Providence and a coherent, straightforward vision of what education should be, because everything really revolves around that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've noticed that too in my specific role, trying to help people start schools as an agent of Memoria Press, as someone affiliated with our company. What I feel like sometimes I bring to the table is not really my own personal experience, but the experience as someone who's been a part of an institution that has thought about materials that anyone can use, that have been fine-tuned, that are excellent. And to be able to be an expert on those materials kind of sets us apart from someone who comes along and just says, I'm a human being who wants to help other people flourish. We all are. But I also know a lot about these books and can help you to use them.
Well, and I mean, on that note, I remember Cheryl turning to me one day. She was like, Paul, you really need to market that these curriculum guides, these lesson plans we have is the way to start a school. This is, if you want to start a school, you don't have to think about what you're going to teach. It's already done for you. And that is the majority of the work, because that's what she poured all of her effort into starting Highlands, was what are we going to teach? Because she was developing this curriculum plan, right?
And what can we get done in a day?
Right. And she was like, this is, I think she was kind of going, I wish I'd had this 20 years ago,
Sure.
And so for those people that you're dealing with, or thinking about starting schools, that's a huge piece that's just taken right off of your shoulders.
But again, this does work against this idea of innovation and creativity and all this sort of thing, because people think that somehow implies that order is bad, that order is somehow in conflict with creativity, and it's not. I mean, go back and look at my daughter-in-law is an artist. She learned the specific basic things that you had to know to be a good painter. You have to learn certain rules even in creativity. So when you learn how to write, it's this thing. Let's just be creative and imaginative and just think something. That's not the way to do it. You need a structure. I mean, I remember being given instructions like that when I was a student, and I had no idea what to do and didn't do anything very well because nobody gave me any rules on how to do it. It's not the opposite of creativity. Order is not the opposite of creativity.
No, and it really is irritating to me when people think that because we do have a developed curriculum and we do have study guides, that is a teacher killer or that it would make a teacher lazy. It could make a teacher lazy, but that's not the intention. The intention is it's a guide, just like it says it's a guide. But that doesn't mean that you aren't still going to have flourishing conversation. It's just supposed to guide you toward good conversation in your classrooms and toward inspiring imagination and awe in your students, because the content is so good. So having the content that's the easy part. We've given people that. But actually what you do with it in the classroom, that is your freedom. And I've just seen such excellent teachers bringing it alive. So it's not a teacher killer. It should be a teacher helper. And I would like to jump over to the homeschool market just for a second, if that's okay, to say that it was developed for a school and, grew out of a school, which does make us a unique curriculum company. But when Cheryl, her vision also was, she started working with homeschoolers. That was her vision. She didn't
And she was a homeschooler herself.
She was a homeschooler, and she didn't really intend that she would end up with this big institution. But when we started developing it for the homeschool market, and it was going to be the same curriculum, we made some mistakes because we just sent it out like, this is what we do in the second grade, this is what we do in the third grade. And it wasn't perfect for the homeschool market. And our homeschoolers that are on the forum, that call us, that email us, they were so helpful to us to let us know what those mistakes were and to help us help each other. They were really helping each other, because the changes that we made to make it successful in their homes then helped other homeschool parents. And I mean, it's still a work in progress. It's not perfect, and it's not static. It's a living, breathing thing, which that's a problem, because when we make changes to guides, it's really irritating to people, but
we're committed to excellence.
We are committed to excellence. And it's just, I don't see really that we would ever be finished. I would like to be finished. And I had this thought that we would get through 12th grade and be finished, but
then Marv went off and started college, so now we're going to grade who knows what.
That's true.
Yeah.
Shane, can we dig in more?
I would
into
love
what
for you to dig into this.
Tanya mentioned this idea of it not being a teacher killer, and I feel like we kind of need to talk about how to use the guides. How you're going to use it in kindergarten or first grade versus how you're going to use it in 11th, 12th grade. Can we do that, Tanya?
Sure.
Do you want to start in the lower school?
I can start, and then you'll pick it up in middle school.
Pick it up in middle school, sure.
Yeah. So in the lower school, in primary especially, the guides are used specifically at the total direction of the teacher. So the teacher is helping the students orally to come up with the answers to the questions, putting through discussion, but really helping the students to learn to form a good sentence. We're really working on mastering a sentence. And then the teacher puts it on the board, and they talk about punctuation and capitalization and words that are hard to spell. And then the students copy it in their best penmanship using their 3 Ps. So it's very structured, very disciplined, very much 100% teacher-led. And then in the grammar school, we start loosening that up. Third grade is pretty much like second. But then by fourth, we start doing just keywords, and the students are making their own sentences. And by the sixth, the students are working very independently to get ready for middle school, where they are working a lot.
So you would say the key differences are how much clear and explicit instruction the teacher is giving the student as they are completing the books and the exercises in the books. That's the main difference between like K and fourth. Whether
we're reading the Bible or a literature book, novel, or whatever it is, that there's still going to be this discussion that hopefully will engage the students and instill in them a sense of wonder at all they're learning. But then their written work it's very much about modeling, and it's very black and white in the early years. But by fourth grade, especially 5th and 6th, the questions become more abstract and the discussions get more elevated.
And do you think that pattern is true in the homeschool setting as well as the school setting? And what are the differences?
No, it should be the same. We would expect that it be the same. Now, it is harder in the homeschool setting because you may have 6 children on 6 different levels. So how you do that, there are on our forum are some amazing stories of how these homeschoolers arrange their days so that they work with one student in literature one day and another student the next, and then that student that they work with the one day is more independent the next. It's amazing. And I don't really know how they do it exactly, but they do it.
The study guides are in some senses exhaustive, right? You don't have to answer in written form every single question in the study guide, even at that level.
That's true. You don't.
And Martin, what were you going to add?
Well, I was just going to interject something I tell homeschooling mothers who do have a lot of children of different ages, that there are certain things you can do with multi-grades together. Those subjects like that are not cumulative and incremental, like history and literature. I mean, you can do 3 age levels in that, and just have them vary the work a little bit. Whereas subjects like math and Latin, I think, are subjects where you just are where each individual is where they are, and you can't really do it to a very great extent. So it does ease the life of a homeschool family, though, when you can take some subjects like history and literature and do 2 or 3 children together in the same thing. So they're all basically reading the same kind of stuff, maybe doing different exercises or something.
So then, Paul, you have thoughts on how this kind of shifts going into upper school, high school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking back to the first year I taught at Highlands, and I made a lot of assumptions, which is funny because I came in and I remember walking into that 7th grade classroom, and it was a 7th grade classroom full of boys. And I said, look, I'm giving you this study guide. We are not going to go through this question by question. You are to use this like a notebook. And it worked out wonderfully, but I did notebook checks. Administration made sure I did notebook checks, right? Which was they were study guide checks, right? And so they'd have to hand them in to me every few weeks. And I was making sure, and I told them, I said, the only homework you have walking out of this class is make sure your study guide is complete. Now, you can do that while we talk, right? Because while we're having this discussion, I'm going to make sure we're going to be hitting all of these points. But I'm not going to say number 3. What's the answer to number 3, right? And so it gets them more used to this sort of dynamic discussion. And I would spend the vast majority of the class time having discussions, and they were learning to pull out the big ideas, right?
And they could do that because the study guide questions were guiding them to what the big ideas
step by
were.
step. And they would, and they had the total freedom at the end of the classroom to be like, Mr. Shaeffer, you really did not talk about number 6. And I'm really confused as to what that was. And we'd go over it, right? I mean, that opportunity was there because they were learning through that. So, and we'd kind of help them through that 7th, 8th grades. And I saw, and one student, and I love taking credit for this student's growth, but she was in 8th grade. And she, at the beginning of the year, it was very much, Mr. Shaeffer, what is the right answer to number 2? What is the right answer to number 3? I don't know what to put for number 4. And I would always turn that back on her and say, well, what do you think? What do you think it should be? Right? Like, we've had this discussion, so, give me an answer. And 3 or 4 years later, I walked into her classroom. She was in a classroom learning philosophy, and she asked a question I don't even think I could articulate. And I was like, she made that transition to my class.
And you're taking credit for that.
I'm absolutely taking credit for that because she went from this lower school, what's the very concrete answer, to starting to think, well, okay, well, what's the deeper meaning to this, right? And that set her up for when she hit our philosophy metaphysics class in 11th grade, and I think it was Theo Harwood teaching that class, and she was ready to engage. And that 7th, 8th grade time, I think it's time to, as Tanya mentioned, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, we're breaking them out of that step by step. We're telling you exactly what to write down. But 7th and 8th grade, that's kind of where walls are falling down. You don't have those crutches anymore to set you up for high school level work, right? And high school, you're doing the same thing where that guide is a guide for the student, right? And the teacher has a copy to make sure that they're hitting the major things, but the teacher's leading this discussion, right? Ideally, right? And if you don't have an opportunity for discussion, right? If you're a homeschooler and you're there by yourself, you have prompts to make for you to write essays about and to think and to engage and to put that down in written form.
Or you have the online academy.
I hate to be super self-promoting.
But I mean, it's true. There is help out there to give students the discussion that really will enrich their education. The online academy instructional videos, which, we need to do more of.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities out there to get that discussion, but those study guides are going to make sure you get the basic understanding of what's happening, and there's going to be plenty of prompts for you to start thinking more deeply about, what am I doing? But the teacher doesn't, in the upper school, does not need to feel confined to going number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, which the lower school teacher is going to do more of.
Yeah, and that's something I wanted to talk about too, is a curriculum when you're using it at the lower school level and a curriculum when you're using it at the upper school level, the role of the teacher is a little bit different. When you're at the lower school level, you really need to be dependent on the curriculum, and the teacher obviously has to execute it and do it properly and all that. But having founded a couple schools and worked at another one or two, it's a good curriculum at the lower level is a safety net. And even I remember when my kids went to a private school, they had a set curriculum, and there was a couple not very good teachers there, but even then they learned because they had that curriculum there as a safety net. Whereas when you get into the upper grades, there's more space for the teacher to operate in, right. and you need a more learned person to teach an upper school class. It just requires more of the teacher, and it's a different kind of teacher you're going to be looking for in the upper school. That's right.
And we are at Highlands, we are very specific about how our primary and grammar school classes are run, because we're looking for that consistency from class to class to class, and that the students all have the same experience. By middle and high school, you've got different teachers that they're freer, I suppose. We don't sit on them like we do the primary and grammar school teachers. It is a whole different animal. And wouldn't it be really nice if we had some kind of help for students taking metaphysics? Wouldn't it be great to have like a metaphysics study guide?
I think there's somebody's
we should get somebody to do that.
No, I don't think so, because it's not on my desk.
Well, I think the study guide is fairly well polished, but the teacher's guide is the one that needs some work.
But how is the teacher going to teach metaphysics without a teacher guide?
Paul, if we
I'm just glad she's pointed toward you right now, and not.
As Martin said, this is where the highly polished and informed teacher just shines.
Videos would be really nice too. Metaphysics videos, wouldn't that be nice?
That would be nice.
So let's give some help to those schools that they're trying to do upper school history or upper school metaphysics, and they don't have a metaphysics guide for some reason, or they're trying to do upper school science, and they don't have a great a teacher, or they don't. At that point, if you've looked at these high school history curriculums, they're dense, they're difficult. What's your advice to those schools? How do they get around that obstacle?
Well, I would say, first of all, that is a very legitimate issue, because there were times, even teaching the Book of the Ancient Greeks, right, where I'm like, we're not going to sit here and read 30 pages in class together. If I can give a 30-minute lecture and condense it down, and so, but I had the background knowledge to be able to kind of quickly condense that down for them, right? And so that's going to happen in American history, it's going to happen in European history, right? Those are things that happen, and you have those dense textbooks, and there may be some engaging stories in there, but really the teacher, Dustin Warren is amazing at bringing in stories and making that come alive. So that is I will say that's a legitimate issue. Number one, I think there are a lot of people in every community that have a passion for different things, even if they come in for one class, right? I'm thinking of, Mr. Dennis and a couple of like a physics. We had an advanced physics teacher.
Well, and we had a doctor teach biology one year because we didn't have a biology teacher.
Well, you talk about something like, you mentioned Mr. Dennis, who to me is the model kind of teacher you want to have in the upper school to teach something like history. And, we do use a more formalized textbook. We don't use a lot of textbooks in our program, but we do for the upper school American history and European history. And that's not bad. I mean, Mr. Dennis used the textbooks that and he would, if you watched him teach, he'd get up there, and it wasn't a textbooky approach he was taking, even though he was doing it out of a textbook, because he had long experience teaching this. He was well read, he was learned, and he had an anecdote for every example he had to give.
He did, but what Shane is saying, what do you do when you don't have that
I know, that's what I'm
teacher?
saying.
So that's the idea.
You are, but I mean, at least in that case, you still have the textbook you can use, so you could still get that knowledge in there.
And it's just going to be a lot of, it's hard work.
Ultimately,
It's going to be hard work.
The ideal is to have a good teacher teaching it who is widely read and can put some of those events in context. Probably, then Mr. Dennis was an older person.
Right.
And really, you almost need an older person to teach some of those subjects. Those of us who grew up in the 60s and 70s, we knew all about World War II. I can tell you some things on World War II. I could do a class on World War II, even though I've never taught it and don't really want to. But there's a context you have as a person who's lived through a certain era. So that's one thing, is you probably need an older teacher to teach some of the history subjects,
But also, because you have that set curriculum, somebody who's coming in, let's say, is not a veteran teacher of American history or European history or whatever, they can take that, they can read that text and then go try to find 2 or 3 outside things that helps bring that alive, and they can teach that lesson.
And that is the key, is just, I just taught 5th grade or 6th grade. And so when the week that I taught Charlemagne, I bought every remaindered book on the Middle Ages from Barnes & Noble, and I just had them on a shelf. And the night before I would teach, I would go read everything in every one of those books. I'd look in the index, everything about Charlemagne, jot down, some interesting things that I felt like the students needed to know. It was hard work to teach that first year, and to teach from a high school history text, I'd do it the same way. I would just read the chapter, find some outside sources to help me, and then make a script.
And because Tanya says I can be self-promoting, if you're a small school, you got 2 or 3 students, you need to teach American history, there's the online academy. We can work with you.
I think at least one model I've seen that is pretty interesting, and I have is Highlands Latin in Indianapolis. And I haven't talked to Mrs. Houston about her kind of thinking when she was hiring in high school, but what it appeared to me as just kind of observing later is that she's hired a couple of really, really talented language people to teach Latin and Greek. And then she's trained middle school teachers who are talented to also teach Latin. And so she has this awesome language core for high school. And then they have, now they've attracted really good literature and history teachers, but having those really strong language people gave the school a reason to kind of attract people, because they're like, we can get great Latin education at this school, and then you can meet the needs in the other areas until you're able to bring in that great talent. That's kind of a unique way that we can do it.
That's right. I could take a concise history of the American Republic, and I could go into high school and I could teach that. There is no way I could teach an upper level Latin course or an upper level math course.
Yeah, in a sense, then even in the upper school, a good piece of the curriculum, like even in that case, a textbook, it is a safety net. You can at least rely on that. It might not be the best class in the world, but you're going to get through the material and try to find somebody who can teach it better than that next year.
Well, this is a great conversation on curriculum. I really enjoyed it. Thank you all for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Classical Etc. If you'd like to show your support for the show, then you can leave a like below. If you'd like to add your voice to the conversation, then you can comment. And if you want to follow along with us on this journey, then please subscribe. Thanks, and I'll see you later.